So, what I want to talk about today is documentation. And so, if we still think that we're at the beginning of a process and we don't yet have a design system, you can start your documentation now. Documentation isn't just saying what components are for or how to use colors or any of the details. You can start by giving clarity on what you mean by the term design system. You can start by getting together any principles you have, however early in the process of this is how we're going to do this. Maybe you've got an idea of the structure or who's involved. All of these things are worth capturing really, really early on. They'll probably change, and they should change. They'll evolve over time, but people should get used to the fact that there is one place to go to find out everything about the design system, what it is, how it's going to work, all of that kind of stuff. One of the things you can also do is try and capture decisions as you go. So at the beginning, you might have a certain bit of information, and so you make a decision about technology or structure of a design tool or something like that, which is fine at the time. But then maybe something else comes to light and you need to change that. So it's really useful as part of onboarding or being able to evaluate future decisions you might need to make by capturing them. So why did you do a certain thing at a certain time? So I'll drop in the description below an article I wrote about that. One of the ideas is that borrowing from a more tech area where they have architecture description decision records, you can use this for almost anything. And so it can be quite lightweight and just be a case of someone proposed this, we had a chat about it, we looked at where we're at, and actually it's not the right thing to do now. The good thing is that you kind of get away from that idea of we tried it once and so we can never try it again, which sometimes happens. What you really want is to understand that in that context, it wasn't the right time, it didn't work for a reason, so you can capture that. So when we start to look at this early documentation, we've got this kind of overview, we can start taking people on the journey, we can start explaining how we're going to do whatever this design system becomes. When you start drilling down into components and that side of things, one of the earliest things you might think about doing is a visual audit, which is one of many kinds of audit you can do, which I'll talk about another time. So from that visual audit and from maybe a code audit, you might be the first person to discover there's lots of duplication and where these things actually are, and give people a sense of the challenge that you're trying to address. So even as you're going through, you can start to build that as your initial stage of documentation. There's loads of anecdotes where I've heard there's like 20, 30 different implementations of a primary call to action or something like that. And if you're the first person that's ever realized there's that many through the work that you're doing, it's worth capturing. It starts to tell the story a little bit more broadly about this is the current state of play. This is also the aspiration. And maybe there's not a one or the other. Maybe there's some in-between steps where you can say that the goal would be there is one button. But for reasons at the moment, the most practical step is to get it from 20-something down to 2 or 3. So then also you've got the history in your documentation. We started with this problem and we took these steps to address it. And then at some point, you might have your more idealized solution. All of this gives you context, which helps with onboarding. It also helps people that have legitimate questions or challenges when they can see why, oh, okay, we arrived at this place because this was the original problem that we solved. So sometimes that context is missing when you only store the perfect, the final thing. So what I'd encourage you to do in however you store your documentation is capture everything right from the beginning. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. But once it's captured, you've got that moment in time that you can revisit and go, ha, wow, we didn't know what we were doing then. Or whatever it might be. But it gives you that sense of history and telling a story. So if someone, some kind of stakeholder wants to see, why are we doing this? What is the problem? Why are we wasting all this time on a design system? And it's already captured. It's easier to make a case. You can tell the button story. You could show other examples over time of, well, this inconsistency is a problem, or these things are doing the same job in different ways. There's lots of ways you could use that to tell the stories, to help with buy-in, to help onboard people, and to help people to start consuming from the design system. It might also be that you don't have the perfect solution, but if it's in a Figma file or similar, or in code, you can have people start to pull that component into their work. That means you can improve it after the fact. So, because components are like black boxes, typically people would just consume them and use them, pass in some properties. The way that it's made could change later. It could change under the hood. But once they start consuming it from the design system, you've then got the ability to start changing things behind the scenes. So maybe you've got an imperfect button. Maybe it's not made from the foundations all the way up through the layers properly, as you might see it. But people are using it. It's bringing value. And it's addressing some of that inconsistency. So then when you go back to revise the button and to make it better, it should then feed into all these places it's used, which becomes really powerful. So going back to the premise, you don't have to have components or everything lined up to start documentation. You can do that now. Even, again, going back to the problem space, why do we need a design system? How are we going to do this? Who's going to do it? What are the aspirations for it? There's all of these concepts that you can gather and start documenting now, whatever you use for it.